wind down chapter 20 here, which we should be hopefully finished with it on Monday after today. And we're going to get a long ways today. But we're on 726 under the topic of effects of pheromones, stress, and body fat. And pheromones are those things that we talked about in chapter 12, no, is 11, in the endocrine system that we have, but we really don't consciously know we're sensing them. And so we had talked about the dormitory effect, the study done with college females, and that's a pheromone effect. And there's other pheromones besides just pheromones that synchronize reproductive cycles. There are other pheromones involved. But the effects of that in reproduction obviously would associate to the dormitory effect that we had talked about before, that if you live around and be around and spend time around another person, then your cycles will become synchronized. At least that's what the study said in the dormitory effect. Stress, as we know, will take the opposite effect. It's not going to synchronize, but probably create more chaos. Unpredictability is what you'll find in more of the stress aspect. And body fat goes back to another thing we had talked about. We said that when the body feels stress, it'll turn into a point of let's survive. And then if it feels like we've got a little leeway here, we've got extra energy, a little more time on our hands, then it'll go into a reproductive mode. So when we get to the fat aspect of it, the body feels like, well, we've got some reserve energy. Let's apply this to another aspect that the body can do. And then it'll offer the reproductive aspect of it. So there's your effects of pheromone, stress, and body fat. And they have quite a few things that they talk about in there that basically says the same thing. Now the next little topic that we come into is the contraceptive methods. Now who had that particular little lecture, that little presentation, contraceptive methods? We decided still forms of the pill is probably the most commonly used even throughout the world, whether it be a shot or a patch, but it's essentially what the pill does, which we said the other day, the pill mimicked the luteal phase of the 28-day cycle. It made the body think it ovulated, but it didn't. And since it didn't, there's nothing to fertilize. So that's still probably number one across the board that's most utilized, probably because we actually see fewer side effects from this. And there are several out there. There's other side effects. There's some that's way more expensive and way more permanent. You may not want a permanent, maybe just want a temporary deal, and it works well for that. And I say fewer side effects. If you ever read the insert in one of those, it's like, oh, well, I wonder which one of these is actually going to kill me. Because you hold it and it unfolds all the way to the ground, and that side is going to take out the uterus or cause breast cancer. And the other side will be cervical cancer and something else. I mean, it's just crazy. And then if you smoke or you throw some other things in there, you just double risk across the board on all of it. It's like, man, I'd be better off finding me a small cabin in the woods and just hibernating the rest of my life instead of messing with life itself. And sometimes that sounds pretty good, though. So the contraceptive methods, they say that 60 million women worldwide are currently using oral contraceptives. And they list beneficial side effects, and sometimes doctors actually give this to teenage girls to maybe correct a cycle or make the cycle less harsh. Sometimes it lessens cramping and bleeding and shortens the cycle. And there's a variety of reasons they may actually use this on a temporary basis. So the beneficial side effects including a reduced risk of endometrial and ovarian cancer and a reduction in osteoporosis. However, maybe an increased risk of breast cancer and possibly cervical cancer with oral contraceptives. Danged if you do and danged if you don't. The next topic they list is a rhythm method. And I'm actually a little bit surprised you find this in a book. Did y'all touch on that a little bit?
Yeah.
And the rhythm method it's pathetic. You actually, the woman has to document on a daily basis her cycle. And it even comes down to taking a body temperature, because temperature will fluctuate just slightly with different hormone secretions. And usually progesterone, I think, increases the temperature just slightly. And so, but anyway, they use this as a predictive method of when you're going to ovulate. Well, in today's time, we can go down to Walmart and buy an ovulation stimulation kit, it's gonna test LH in the urine, and we know, we don't have to spend all this time documenting it on the calendar, months and months and months, and that just drives you nuts. We have better things to do now, so. Anyway, the rhythm method's a really good way to get in a rhythm, to have a bunch of kids, Curly. You get in a good rhythm, you'll just have one kid right after another, be spitting them out right and left. So it's not a contraceptive method. If we consider it a contraceptive method, we'll say it's rather poor contraceptive method, okay? And they tell you that basal body temperature sharply rises as a result of progesterone secretion and remains elevated throughout the luteal phase of the cycle. So as that luteal phase of the cycle starts going away, then we see the temperature drop, which tells the woman, I'm fixing to ovulate again, or my cycle's fixing to, here we go again. And it goes on to say it's an unreliable method in predicting the day of ovulation from one month to the next. Sade, we all voted and we said that you would probably just leave after you took the test. You could have left it, oh, that's all right. Now I guess this next topic on 728 is an excellent way to actually stop pregnancies, is when the woman goes into menopause. But you know, there has been some cases where women have gotten pregnant while in menopause. Just because their system is going through changes doesn't mean all of a sudden the ovary decide, I'll just ovulate one. Let's throw one out there and see what happens. That really messes up life at that point. But typically the case is the hormones are just messed up. We don't get ovulation, but there has been several documented cases, so beware on that. The menopause, of course, is where the female body drops estrogen levels, and they have withdrawal of estradiol. And symptoms of menopause include vasomotor disturbances, urogenital atrophy, hot flashes, fall in core body temperature is followed by feelings of heat, profuse perspiration. So you've got a variety of things going on there. One minute you're hot, the next minute you're cold, you're all over the place. And throughout most of your life, the woman typically is the colder natured one, would you agree? And I know for me, I'm the hot natured one, so I've always got the air conditioner cranked and I'm freezing the wife out, and in the winter time, she's burning me up, and I mean, it's just, well, there's a point at which that changes. When she goes through menopause, it turns right the opposite. Now she's hot all the time, and I'm the one freezing because I have poor circulation and I'm old. I'm old and decrepit with poor circulation. So our household is getting close to this. I can smell it coming. When she left this morning, the window was open in the bathroom. She was burning up. Now this afternoon, she's liable to be cold again. It's like, you never know. It's a crapshoot out there. Other means of contraception that's really not mentioned in this book, y'all had talked about, I don't know if you actually mentioned the term Norplant, but you had talked about the 5 little prongs that went in the arm, and that's a progesterone that's supposed to last 5 years. Should be easily removed. The actual original Norplant was a pain. The doctors literally boycotted it because it was such a pain. It worked well, but when the female would come in year 3 and decide, I want to have a family, so pull these babies out, it was like major surgery getting these things to come out because scar tissue set up around them, and it was terrible. So doctors started kind of boycotting them, but I think they've gotten a little better now because it works so well. They kind of made a few adjustments to it that you see some of them being used out there again today. And then you had intrauterine devices, you had cervical caps, you had spermicides, foams, different variety of things that you don't see listed in a lot of books, and it's unreal the number of things that can be used, and that's not even mentioned in condoms. So female and male condoms that's out there as well. So I'm glad we did a section on that to add to what the book talking about, because the books, they didn't decide to get into any kind of depth here. So moving on to now fertilization, pregnancy, and parturition, kind of leaving off to the big lecture that we had on Wednesday. Once we got fertilization, it takes about 6 to 8 days for it to get to the uterus, and by day 8 to day 10, implantation should take place. And we talked about the first thing that develops as implantation's taking place is the chorion. And it's producing HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin, which now is sending a message to the corpus luteum of the ovary to say, we're pregnant, we need more progesterone. And so the corpus luteum now will produce progesterone, and HCG doubles on a daily basis, telling it more progesterone, HCG, more progesterone, HCG, and this goes on for that 8 to 10 weeks till the placenta is fully developed and fully functional. And at that point, the placenta takes over all needs right there in the spot, and we don't have to communicate across the board to other glands in the body. The corpus luteum would actually start to regress at that point and typically go away. Okay? So they talk about capacitation here, and they talk about 100 sperm survive of each fallopian tube, stuff we had up on the board. Capacitation, if you remember, is that time in which the sperm has to spend in the female body before it's actually capable of fertilizing. Basically, it's the time it takes to remove the cap off the enzyme of the head of the sperm. So when the sperm finally meets up with the egg, it has an enzyme capable of eating into the shell of the egg and fertilizing the nucleus of that egg. As a woman usually ovulates one ovum a month for a total of less than 450 in her reproductive years. So 450 eggs in your reproductive years. Moving on over to 730. In the clinical application, I believe Jed talked about in vitro, so here's a little deal on in vitro, and ICSI, intracytoplasmic sperm injection, is mentioned here as well. So 731, now that we have implantation, well, this is actually at the point of fertilization. We're probably not quite implanted yet. We're saying that at about 30 to 36 hours after fertilization, we're obviously not to the uterus yet, we go through a cleavage process, which we're rapidly mitotically dividing. A second cleavage occurs about 40 hours after fertilization. Now we have 4 cells. A third cleavage at 50 to 60 hours. Now we have a ball of 8 cells called a morula. Now, by the 4th day, it says 32 to 64 cells by the 4th day following fertilization. The embryo remains unattached to the uterus. It may be there by the 4th day. Some books will tell you it's not quite even there yet. But if we're in the uterus, we're not attached yet, definitely. And we'll remain unattached in the uterus for a couple more days. So there's at least 6 days there that we're not implanted at all. On the 6th day following fertilization, the blastocyst attaches to the uterine wall. That's the beginning of the attachment. It doesn't just say, okay, today we're going to hook up, and it's just like plugging in a cord. It's not that easy. This blastocyst actually has some enzymatic capabilities that it actually eats away an embedded area in the uterine wall. That's why there's 2 things going on here in the uterus. The uterus is probably as thick, spongy, and has the greatest blood supply at this point in a cycle than any other point, because the child needs to hook up to mom's blood supply. That's what we're hooking up to. And number 2, every time the female has a menstrual cycle, it sloughs off the endometrium. At least we have new cells to work with each time. And if we throw in, 20-year-old cells there, that's really not a good place for this blastocyst to hook up to, because these are old cells. So we have new cells to hook up to. Now, the trophoblast cells produce enzymes, and that's the outer cells of the blastocyst, the trophoblast cells, produce enzymes that allow the blastocyst to eat its way into the thick endometrium. Do you think this might cause spotting in early pregnancy? It definitely could. I mean, in theory, it could. This begins the implantation, or what's called the nidation process. By the 7th to 10th day, the blastocyst is completely buried into the endometrium. It's attached. It's attached. At that point, the chorion is producing HCG. At the point of attachment, HCG starts skyrocketing. It doubles on a daily basis. Now, the clinical application here, and who did the one on RU 486? Was that Jed? Was that in yours? No. Did anybody do that one? Maybe not in this class. Maybe it's the other class. You did it?
Well, it's used for abortion and birth.
Yeah, it's the abortion pill. I guess it's somebody in the other class that
We
did
did
this
it.
one.
It was the methotrexate.
Yeah, mifepristone?
Oh, yeah, methotrexate.
Mifepristone, I believe it is. But here, yeah, it basically causes the uterine lining to slough off. But they found that if you use this with a prostaglandin, says that mifepristone followed by prostaglandin treatment to be 96 to 99% effective at terminating pregnancies up to 49 days. Now, let's look at our time setting here. At what point does the placenta take over? What's the minimum point placenta takes over? 8 weeks? Okay, 49 days is 7 weeks, right? Okay, placenta is not quite taken over. This causes sloughing of the lining of the uterus, which if implantations start to take place, we just said by the 7th week, it's pretty solid in there. It's pretty hooked up. But prior to that, it's not implanted. So sloughing of the lining would take the blastocyst with it, wouldn't it? Okay, so how does the prostaglandin play a role? It plays a role in the hormones, because prostaglandins will kill the corpus luteum. If you kill the corpus luteum, you don't have progesterone, and placenta is not quite taken over. So whether you get it sloughed off or not, you killed it, and it'll eventually come out. One way or another, you've killed it. Okay, so they're trying to kill two birds with one stone. They're trying to go ahead and remove all the inner lining. They're doing an automatic DNC. What's it called? DNC. Okay. They're doing an automatic one of those caused by a pill, plus we're making sure that this baby's dead. That's why we call it it's not a birth control mechanism, it's the abortion pill. That's why it's called that. So now we use prostaglandins in the cattle industry all the time. I mean, I'm fixing to use prostaglandins in the next few days, but all it does is kill the corpus luteum. So, and it takes corpus luteum about 5 or 6 days to make itself functional. Okay, so let's say I have a cow out there in the pasture that I saw in heat 7 days ago, and I decided I want to artificial inseminate her in the next 3 or 4 days. I pull her up in the lot. I give her a shot of prostaglandin, 5 cc's. The prostaglandin I use is called Luteolise, and it'll kill the corpus luteum that's there now, because she's not pregnant, she hasn't been exposed. It'll kill that corpus luteum, and it'll quickly make her develop another egg within the next 48 to 72 hours, and she'll be in heat again. And I'll artificial inseminate her off of that. She'll ovulate, and we can get pregnancies out of that. Now, there's also cases we have to use Luteolise where, and this happened to me a few years ago, I have a set of registered Angus heifers, a really pretty set of registered Angus heifers, and the neighbor's conglomeration of whatever kind of bull gets in there. We don't know which one he bred, we just know he was in there. So now I have to pull them all up. I wait, from the point I saw him in there, I wait about 7 or 8 days. Pull them all up, give them all a shot of Luteolise. And whatever might have gotten pregnant, we killed the corpus luteum. We did it prior to any implantation, so her body really never knew she was pregnant. We cleared the system, and here we go again. We call the neighbor and say, and we've done this before, would you like us to haul your bull to the cell for you? And we had one neighbor say, would you do that? He's getting out all the time. Would you haul himself for me? I can't believe you'd be that nice. We'd be glad to haul him to the cell for you. Never see him again. And then another neighbor, oh, I'll just bring him back. We'll keep him home. He'll be back again. So we have to stand guard. But anyway, that's where the prostaglandin plays its role. It kills the corpus luteum. All right, moving on over to 734. And this is some stuff we've already talked about. We got HCG it's massively being produced to maintain progesterone production from the corpus luteum. And down at the very bottom it tells the secretion of HCG starts declining by the 10th week of pregnancy. Now why? what has taken over here? The placenta's taken over. So we don't need that communicative realm between HCG and the corpus luteum. And it's starting to decline at 10 weeks, but is it gone? I mean, HCG really hangs around, I mean, just through our little tests and stuff, it hangs around out there 6, 7 months, 8 months, it's gone. We know that. We just don't know exactly the day it disappears, you know. That'd be pretty cool to know. It'd be an expensive way to figure it out, but it'd be pretty cool to know. Actually, this hormone's required for only the first 5 to 6 weeks of pregnancy, and just to be safe, 8 weeks of pregnancy. So if it's hanging around, we've still got a little bit of corpus luteum. As it starts going away, so does the corpus luteum. Over on 735, we see that there's two structures here, the chorion frondosum, fetal tissue, and deciduous basalis, the maternal tissue. Together they make up the placenta. So we have some developed from mom, some developed from the child, and they mesh together to make the placenta. And you know, the contact between this placenta and mom's uterus, there's only points of contact. And these points of contact gets bigger with age. They may start small, then a little bit bigger, and a little bit bigger, and a little bit bigger. At delivery, they'll be the largest they are. Now, those points of contact is called cotyledons. Cotyledons is literally when the placenta is delivered after the birth of the child, the cotyledons literally looks like peeling flesh from flesh, where they peel off the uterine wall, and the uterine wall heals right back up, and another implantation can occur. Now, if that uterus wasn't coming out fast enough for the doctor and he just reaches in there and jerks that sucker out, then he could tear the uterine wall. It's very important that the contractions of the uterus separate this very solidly, because if don't, we could have hemorrhaging, bleeding, tearing the uterine wall, and that would be scar tissue in the uterine wall that would not allow implantation if it decided to implant there again. So difficulty in getting pregnant again. So that's just something you let nature take its course, and when the contractions deliver it, it's delivered. I've seen doctors take forceps and just start rolling it up on there, and they'll apply a little bit of pressure for the contractions to go ahead and jar it loose, but you never see them. Let's get that thing out of there. That's bad. If somebody starts jerking on your placenta, you ought to raise up there and get slappy cross-eyed.
I'm sure they would.
Yeah. Yeah. There would be some pain involved in that deal too. All right, moving on over to 736. Talk briefly here on amniocentesis. You know, the average everyday pregnancy that's going well, there would be no need for an amniocentesis. Amniocentesis can tell us a lot of things though. If we suspect some genetic defects, if we see abnormalities on an ultrasound and we want to confirm these, we could use an amniocentesis. And this is my belief in today's time. We have so much technology. In today's time, an amniocentesis is used to confirm genetic defects, and which is used to confirm whether a doctor will advise you to abort this baby or not. And I think it's all it's used for in today's time to say, your baby, according to amniocentesis, has this problem, this problem, this problem. I'll advise you to abort because you don't need to deal with that the rest of your life. Well, that's not his decision to make. That's mama's decision to make. And as long as that baby's alive, then we'll just let that baby go. I mean, that's my opinion. But it can tell you a lot of things if you want to know. If it's not going to make a bit of difference in your decision in life, if regardless of what they think your baby has, you're going to carry this baby anyway, it's a waste of money. And all you'll do is increase the chances of miscarriage. Now they're good at amniocentesis these days. They'll do it with an ultrasound. I watched a little ultrasound one time of an amniocentesis. They went in with a needle, and this child actually saw the needle and come up to the needle. I mean, was just bird dogging this needle. And so by seeing that, they retracted the needle back, and the child went on bouncing around. Went back in with the needle, start drawing. Here comes the child back. They literally had to take the needle out and come in behind the child so the child couldn't see it, because every time they stuck the needle in, he was like right up there sticking his eyeball in. And there was supposed to be something wrong with this child, you know. And this kid was all over the place. So back in the old days when they first started amniocentesis, they didn't have the ultrasound technology. So they just stuck the needle in, hoped they didn't hit the kid. And a lot of times if it was a nick or something, they healed up and you never know it. But if it was major, the skulls are really soft. If you went in, bam, we had a miscarriage. It was up to 10% or so causing miscarriages at one time. Now it's much less than that, but because we're much better at it. But we can tell you a lot of things from amniocentesis. Definitely the sex of the child, but they list things like Tay-Sachs disease is one of those. I don't see anything else mentioned there, but any kind of genetic disorder, Down syndrome, easy, trisomy 21, trisomy 18, and what they can literally do is take the cells that's in the amniotic fluid and create what's called a karyotype. We'd match up 23 sets of chromosomes. And when we got finished matching up this 23 sets of chromosomes, if we had an extra chromosome, then we got trisomy somewhere. And like set 13, those chromosomes are pretty identical. If we have another extra chromosome floating around out there and it looks like set 13, we've got trisomy 13. And that's how they can tell you this. And they used to, it'd take them 90 days to get results on this. They can turn it in a week or two now. We've gotten so good at this, but it'll tell you a ton of stuff. It's just your decision as a mother and as a parent. Do you want to spend the money to know something that's not going to make a difference in your decision? I mean, that's what it comes down to. The doctors want to know, so they're going to push you to go do it. They want to know for their own purposes, but you have to make the ultimate decision. And I'll just tell you a brief story on this. A former student, and it's been years and years ago, almost mid-90s, right after I first came here, we were kind of talking about amniocentesis, and this one girl raised her hand. She said, I got pregnant at 16. Boyfriend / father of the child suddenly had no interest in me nor the child, and so I was going to have this child by myself. And her parents would support her. Her mom would go with her to get through this process, and it was tough on her. Well, at some point, and I'm not exactly sure at what point, but they do a set of screening tests. You might help me on this, Jennifer, that may come back and
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure what it's called, but it'll tell you if there's a possibility of Downs.
Yeah, they
and
tell you
things.
what your chances are of
And,
having it.
and I'll tell you all this up front, that's their choice to do that, and you can choose not to have that done. It's about 50% accurate. There's so many false negatives and false positives in that
They
deal.
told me I had like 1 in 200,000 chance.
It messes up. I mean, you get one back that says, your child may have Down syndrome, and it just freaks you out, and then you go run all these other tests, you're okay. So those tests are not very accurate. But anyway, they do this panel testing, and it came back, this girl said, your child has Down syndrome. And so they pushed for an amniocentesis. She went and got an amniocentesis, not knowing better, scared to death. Amniocentesis come back, your child has Down syndrome. So this doctor just literally starts heckling her. You're 16 years old. You don't need a Down syndrome child the rest of your life. It'll just be in your way. You need to abort this child while you have a chance. And she wouldn't abort it. She absolutely would not. She stuck her foot in the ground. She ended up firing that doctor because he heckled her so much. And she told him, if you don't leave me alone about it, well, he didn't want to mess with a Down syndrome child. So I don't know if he meant to get himself fired, whatever. She fired him and went and found a doctor that would she said, just deliver my baby. And they did, and there wasn't nothing wrong with that baby. Not one thing was wrong with that baby when it was delivered. Now, you can look at that one of two ways. Man-made test and man-made red test, and it's man screwed up. The test was wrong. Or God chose to heal the baby when she made the decision to keep it. So, how strong is your beliefs? That's the way you got to look at it. It's one of the two. It's nothing else but one of the two. So, I choose the latter myself. I think God put her in she made a decision, and obviously in a weak moment, she got pregnant. Okay, not a good decision, but she's pregnant. But she didn't screw it up with a second bad decision. And as she said, at that point, I think the baby was 2 years old. She said, that's my best friend. Couldn't do without him now, his little boy. So I thought that was pretty cool So amniocentesis, as good as they are, and they'll tell you they're 96, 98% effective, they're not 100%, any which way you look at it. Moving on over to the right-hand side of the page on 737, we have endocrine functions of the placenta, and the placenta does produce what's called chorionic gonadotropin, HCG, we've already talked about that, and chorionic somatomatropin. Well, somatomatropin acts together with growth hormone from the mother's pituitary to produce a diabetic-like effect. Now, why, during pregnancy, would you need a diabetic-like effect? Does mom need energy? Does the baby need energy? If we don't have a little extra glucose flowing through the system, one of them is going to run out of gas in a hurry, and it's not going to be the baby. You know why you take prenatal vitamins? Is it for mama? Yeah, it's for mama, because the baby's going to get it out of your storehouse. So if you don't supplement your stuff back, baby's just going to suck you dry. And you know, back in the day, when they started really diagnosing osteoporosis and stuff, they didn't have prenatal I mean, these women were having 5, 6, 7 children, no supplementation back in their system except what they ate, and they were breastfeeding on top of that. You imagine the calcium that was pouring in and out of their body. More was going out than was coming in. And so that's where now we can prevent a lot of that now, because we have some really good prenatal vitamins, some across the counter that are good prenatal, but some of those doctors give you, they're so strong they'll even make you sick if you take them the wrong time of day and you're a little queasy anyway. They're pretty strong. You've taken some of those, haven't you?
Yeah, that's what
They're like big monster horse pills, aren't they? But they've got everything in there. Have you ever noticed your fingernails get stronger and the hair on your head gets shinier and stronger and it grows more? And I mean, these are some serious vitamins, but they're there for you. And if you decide not to take them, it's you that's being punished, not the baby. The baby's going to get what it needs. It's going to suck it right out of your system. So, diabetic-like effect. Now, we don't want that to be too much. So, at what, 20 weeks, we have to drink this wonderful Kool-Aid stuff?
That's 24 to 28.
24 to 28, and to see if you're producing too much glucose. Because if you are, then this baby's going to get huge in a hurry. This baby's like, it's hanging off the ceilings. It's just all over the place. But they'll get big in a hurry. So, and that's not a safe thing for mom either. If you have gestational diabetes with pregnancies, you have an increased chance of having diabetes later in life. There's a direct correlation to that. So, moving on over to 738 and 739, as we begin to close out the rest of this chapter, we see here in labor and parturition. I'm going to sit down here for a minute, Tracy. I don't know if that gets me or not. Because when we start discussing the onset of labor in humans, we're really grasping at straws. We really don't know what originally triggers that initial contraction that starts in sequential events that tells you, I must be in labor. Now, we had Braxton Hicks contractions. Did you have those? Those little fake ones that just irritated the crap out of you all the time? And that was nothing more than the uterus creating sensitivity over time. As it become more sensitive, you'd have more of those, more frequent. Sporadic those, you'd have more frequent, but no consistency in their time frame. Real labor started developing consistency. So, a lot of confusion, especially on first pregnancy. I'm in labor, I've had contractions for 30 minutes and they're 8 minutes apart, and then they go away, not to show up for another week. So that it creates a lot of problems. So our studies in this, what brings on the onset of labor? Parturition. The studies on this are done in cattle, sheep, goats, whatever. And what they found is that the fetus, when it reaches a point of maturity, the adrenal cortex of the fetus will produce a cortisol that we've already studied, and the cortisol causes the uterus to become more sensitive. Now that sensitivity, I think that cortisol is starting to develop and starting to produce these Braxton. This is just some theory and speculation we're throwing out there. But we get the Braxton Hicks contractions, we become more sensitive and more consistent as more of this is produced. And then boom, once we get consistency with those labors, with the labor pains, then that causes oxytocin secretion, which causes the muscle contractions of the uterus to be stronger. Stronger the contraction, more oxytocin. More oxytocin, stronger the contraction. But today's belief, and this is just recently because at one time they just was unsure in humans, but today's belief is that the adrenal cortex of the fetus itself produces a cortisol that triggers the onset of labor. Now the sequence of events that is part of that, we still really don't know exactly what's going on there, but we do know once labor kicks in, oxytocin just starts skyrocketing. Contraction up, oxytocin up, contraction up, oxytocin up, and that's another positive feedback reaction that occurs in the body. So, what is average labor time for your first pregnancy? You don't look very excited this morning, Miss Jennifer. What's that? How long were you in labor?
Oh my God, like 23 hours?
Oh, so your doctor liked to torture you, huh?
Well, I wasn't, they started mine themselves.
Okay, so we induced some labor.
Yeah.
Both of them?
Yes.
So you had Pitocin hooked up to you.
Oh my God.
Well, see, and you can't compare this, but women that have had natural labors and have induced labor says the induced labors are awful.
Yeah.
Induced Pitocin labors tend to be harder labors than that induced by the body naturally. So, and when you have your third and fourth child, have them naturally. No can do, huh?
No, I was so sensitive to the Pitocin that by the time my contraction would start going away, the next one was already coming. So it was just all peaks, no valleys.
There was no valleys in that deal, huh?
No, they had to turn it off. It was terrible.
Typically, and your body kicked in its own system. And our first child, that's kind of what happened. They got her hooked up on Pitocin, and like within an hour, they just pulled Pitocin off. Her system had already kicked in. And my wife's first labor was 8 hours, 7 hours, something like that. Her body kicked in. And we had 3 different doctors on all of our kids, but this particular doctor, when her labor kicked in and started being pretty consistent, he just come in and broke her water. And that we figured out real fast, that was a triggering point for dilation for my wife. Break the water, boom, we're gonna dilate, and this is gonna be over in a little bit. Well, on her second child, we'd moved back here. First child, we lived in Oklahoma City. Well, I was teaching here, and she was still living in Oklahoma City. It was a very stressful time for her, so I just literally had to take a day off, and the doctor told her, said, you're losing weight, what's going on? I said, well, my husband took a new job, and he's in southeast Oklahoma, and I'm just afraid I'll go in labor, and he can't get here. I said, we'll just schedule this for next Friday at your due date anyway. So I took Friday off, but that's how that came about. But because of the stress and everything, it kicked right in. Everything was pretty much due. Our second child, this doctor, in my opinion, was a moron. I absolutely couldn't stand this doctor. He didn't want me involved in anything. I was involved with everything in the first pregnancy. I'd go to all the office visits, any ultrasound, anything. I was there. This doctor, he wouldn't even let me go back to the room. Yeah, I was ready to just finish him off right there. But needless to say, we get into labor, and it was a Monday night. I remember it specifically because Monday Night Football was on, and he didn't want to leave Monday Night Football to come up there, and we sat there in labor, just kind of sit there at the side. I don't remember, the 4 or 5 centimeters or whatever, and we'd tell the nurse, tell him to come up here and break her water and get his scrubs on. Well, he meandered up there and he broke her water and he went back to the house. He didn't even make it back to the house, and they just called him on his cell phone, hurry up. He come through the door, nurses were holding scrubs, and he didn't even get them tied when he sat down and caught the baby coming out. And that irritates me about doctors, and you don't know nothing. We could have told him, we did tell him what was going to happen. He didn't listen. I almost got to deliver that one myself. I'd have sent him a bill.
That's how mine was. It took so long, the doctors kept piddling around, and they thought I was pushing wrong, but he was just...
How do you push wrong? There's only one way out.
That's what they kept telling me. They kept telling me I wasn't pushing right, and then finally they realized he was face up instead of face down.
Okay, he won't come out looking up.
And when they turned him, he came right on out. The doctor was like struggling to put his gloves on. I was like having to clench him so he didn't fall on the floor because nobody was really catching him.
Pull my knees together.
Yeah, I was so mad. I was screaming. It was bad.
I was born face up.
Yeah, you've been looking up ever since, attaboy. Well, that's our theory behind parturition and labor, what brings on the onset of labor. And of course, the amount of labor, the books will tell you 18 hours is average first labor. First pregnancy, typically you carry it over on the average. Everybody's different though. Every labor after that should become shorter. So, I mean, use 22, 23 hours, everything should be much better on your number 3 and number 4, number 5 kids, right?
I'll let you know.
Yeah, I bet you'll shoot me an email, and it probably won't be very pretty if you have a number 3 or number 4. It's your fault, Mr. Dwann. Blame it on me. I'm telling you how to keep from getting pregnant, not getting pregnant. I mean,
I don't want to have kids. I had my teeth.
all right, that brings us to lactation. And well, let me mention this at the top of 7:39, and I'll finish up today, because I don't really have time to finish today, but we will Monday. In fact, we can finish Monday in review. I believe we can. Y'all good for that? So over the weekend, get your study sheet caught up the best you can, because we won't have time to go over every little intricate detail. Sharday, you don't have a long trip this weekend, do you?
Actually, I do. I have a funeral Saturday.
You know,
night.
scheduling around your life is killing this class.
I know, and I'm actually busy this semester too. Usually I don't have a life, but.
Yeah, this semester you do. Well, they list a substance called relaxin. Relaxin is a hormone that kicks in at some point in pregnancy. They really don't tell us exactly when, but it causes softening of the pubic symphysis and relaxation of the cervix. So relaxin literally, it affects cartilage in all your joints, not just the pubic symphysis. Theoretically, when you're pregnant, your joints will be as loose as they'll ever be because of this hormone kicking in. And if you think about it, you know, how can a child with a head this big come through an area that seems so small without something relaxing the cartilage and the whole aspect that's connecting this symphysis area together? Well, that's the hormone that they found it in pigs, rats, and guinea pigs, so they assume women have it too. What they need to do, yeah, don't you love that? What they need to do is create an injection of this stuff. So as we get older and our joints get stiffer, could this not be used to combat arthritis and things like, think about that. Y'all gonna make your millions off my ideas, but send me a check every now and then, will you? I'm telling you, this stuff could be a miracle. You think you
Isn't it already a miracle?
Oh, it is, but it could be above and beyond. It could get the kid
Like
here and make the
miracle?
kid live longer, right? Then if the kid's living longer, he's here longer to take care of you. You're gonna have to sleep more at night. You're almost passed out there. Let's see, relaxin promotes the growth of blood vessels into the deciduous basalis, thus helping to nourish the growing embryo. Following delivery of the baby, oxytocin is needed to maintain the muscle tone of the myometrium and reduce hemorrhaging from uterine arteries. So their last comment there is simply, after the baby's delivered and after the placenta's delivered, they typically hook you back up on Pitocin. And they want the child to nurse as soon as they can to create more oxytocin in the body. Because if we do that, then the uterus continues to contract because it's still sensitive and it gets back to normal size faster and reduces chances of excessive hemorrhage. Then the nurse may come in and do a uterine massage. Did you get that one?
Yes, I did.
It's just like, leave my uterus alone. It's been through enough today.
That's
But-
just about as bad as labor.
All the uterine massage is knowing that the uterus is still extremely sensitive. They just, from the belly, they just touch it. Just touching it, it'll contract. And if it contracts, it's gonna require oxytocin. So any way they can pump the body full of oxytocin at this point is really safer for you, getting you back to normal faster.
Just breastfeeding makes your uterus.
Absolutely, because oxytocin, so we're fixing to get into that in lactation on Monday. Oxytocin causes milk letdown. That's why they want the baby to nurse as soon as it can, because it'll cause milk letdown. At the same time, it's causing the uterus to contract too. So breastfeeding is a fast way of getting your body back to close to normal as you can, the fastest way you can. That'll do it for today. We don't have any makeup